one is from Mexico and the other is like Argentinian or something like that.
Oh, sure.
Yep. All right, we are live. Let me jump us in. Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. I have created life. What? No, let me start again. Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, myself, Matthew, and my co-host Riki are talking about the new Fantastic Four movie. If you've listened to our old stuff, you know this is a movie that Riki was greatly anticipating. I was also anticipating, but from a very different perspective. Riki is a huge Fantastic Four fan. I have had almost no contact with them, but have been curious about them. And now it's out, and as expected, there's some interesting ethical questions that it raises, and we're here to talk about them. And Riki, let me kind of just start by, we're going to get into the questions especially, but let's just kind of start the framework of, as someone who's a big Fantastic Four movie, as someone who is a big Fantastic Four fan, as someone who's been frustrated by earlier depictions of the Four, what'd you think of this movie?
Overall, I would say that this is a very good movie. It's a very good MCU movie, and it could border on great. I don't know. I would have to
Mm-hmm.
rewatch it maybe a second time or a third time to really like hone in on how I feel about it. I was very happy with it, satisfied with the product, but it came at such an interesting time, meaning on the heels of the DC reboot with Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, like, it's impossible not to compare them
Right.
because both movie franchises, both comic book movie franchises, are going through kind of a difficult period
Right.
with their audiences and trying to refocus. And I feel like Superman did that. It set an amazing new direction for DCU under James Gunn. And in that respect, Fantastic Four First Steps was a little disappointing. It felt like just another Marvel movie.
Mm.
And that again is like, as a comic book movie, is okay. It was good. It was enjoyable, fun to watch. But in this moment, I needed it to be more than just another Marvel movie.
Yeah.
And for me it wasn't. So that was a little disappointing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I think, and this is a topic we're going to discuss further, possibly in a different episode, is looking at kind of where these franchises are and how we feel about them and what Superman did. To me, this is better than I feel like we've been kind of in a low point of MCU products for a while, and this feels better to me.
Yeah,
Like Thunderbolts, I think both of them were more solid entries than we've seen in quite a while.
absolutely.
But I think for me, I think the best way to describe it is I left the movie feeling very excited about the characters of the Fantastic Four, feeling like I now had a clear understanding of these people who have been so important to so many others, that I was invested in these characters, that I was really excited to see these characters in other Marvel properties. But I don't think I'm in a rush to watch this movie again. You know, because I feel
Yeah.
like the movie itself, the main plot, Galactus left me very underwhelmed. Um, as my partner in other podcasts, my partner in other podcasts, Pete Wright, as my partner in other podcasts, Pete Wright put it, this felt like a very good second movie when we didn't have the first movie. You know, and a lot of what I was kind of,
Mm.
I didn't want the origin story. I was glad we didn't have that, but I wanted more. I would love to watch more of Mole Man. I would have wanted to watch more of what is the Final Four. What is the Fantastic Four's relationship to the world? That then having this, you know, what it, like for the world to turn against the Fantastic Four didn't mean very much to me when I hadn't seen the world more solidly on their side for a long time. Things like that.
Yeah. Let me also go back and answer the full question you asked. So as a
Sure.
fan of the Fantastic Four
Uh huh.
more in general, this was great.
Yeah.
And it was the best Fantastic Four movie we've gotten, which is the lowest bar. Just the lowest bar. But it cleared it. And it
Okay.
cleared it by a lot. I think it was a good movie, and it was a good depiction of the Fantastic Four and their dynamics as a family. You've probably heard us talk about them. They are Marvel's first family. When they were
Right.
introduced in 1961, they set the course for what Marvel Comics became, and they were the centerpiece of the whole franchise.
Right.
And the fact that they were a family became integral to them. It wasn't as important in the beginning. They were just a team, but they became a family.
Right.
And that again set the tone for so many other Marvel products to be more focused on the human elements while they're still doing ridiculous comic book superhero things.
Right. Like I remember when the MCU first started, one of the things that was talked about a lot was that part of why it was able to be successful was it was about characters who a lot of the public didn't have much of a knowledge of or investment of.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because like the ones people thought that they did were Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. That these were all people who had long histories, and of course there had been devotees of Iron Man and Captain America and the Avengers and all that, but they were nothing as popular as Spider-Man or the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, and that's because of the way that the rights to the characters have been divided up.
Right.
That Sony has the rights to Spider-Man and so many of the characters from that part
Mm-hmm.
of Marvel universe. What Fantastic Four was Fox along with the X-Men. So when Marvel Studios first started, they had to make do with what were at the time considered B-listers
Right.
for many, even like comic book fans.
Right. And I will say, as someone who wasn't introduced to it, but had heard you and Jessica and others talk about it, I felt like I came at this movie having a very solid understanding of who all four of them were, and a very an investment in wanting to see more of them. And I think part of that's because, and here's a way in which I do think the movie was like Superman. It felt like this was we've been in the dark pathos of superheroes for a while, and I love that. I love that aura. This wasn't that, and this had some like moments of like, oh my gosh, are we going to lose? But it did feel like it was a much more fundamentally hopeful perspective than a lot of the MCU has been, than the Zack Snyder had been, and in that regard, it felt like it was. I think I agree with you, not quite on the level of Superman, but going in a similar direction.
Yeah, a lot of people have started to talk about this month, the month of Superman and Fantastic Four,
Uh huh.
as heralding the silver age of comic book movies. Of course,
Right.
I just mentioned that the Fantastic Four ushered in the silver age of comics, like comic books. But this really feels like the industry changing direction.
Yeah.
And of course, like 2008 had Iron Man and The Dark Knight, and people now cite that as like the beginning of the golden age of comic book movies. So like if you look at it like in 5 to 10 years, I do think like this will be seen as an important month, an important
Mm-hmm.
pair of movies in moving things in a different direction. And
Yeah.
you're right, like that it is both of these movies were brightly colored and
Mm-hmm.
lighted, and also had much more hopeful tones
Right.
than a lot of the movies we've had.
Well, and this was, and particularly from Marvel, something we haven't seen in a while. It felt like, no, let me say it again. And this was something that we don't see very often in superhero movies, and I'll say even especially Marvel movies. It was a movie about a superhero team where, while there's conflict between them, there's never a danger of the team breaking up. Like think about how like almost I think every Avengers movie has to some degree involved people quitting the Avengers or saying they're dividing. At one point they literally have a civil war, but even in both Avengers 1 and 2, they all go their separate ways and they come back together. In the Defenders, we only really get all of them together for the big fight. The Eternals is very much about like their you know internal struggles with each other until they finally come back together. This one, they start as a team. They argue with each other some, but there's never a moment where it feels like any of them are going to leave the final. I want to keep calling them the Final Four because I'm too much March Madness guy. The Fantastic Four, and that alone felt like such a big deal and something I really appreciated after being very frustrated that movies had felt really afraid to just let a team of heroes be a team of heroes.
Yeah, and the marketing for this movie really highlighted that. Like Sunday dinner
Yeah.
was such a focus. and it
Right.
opens with that. It opens with the family getting together for Sunday dinner
Right.
after like the weird recap montage.
Right. I mean, even the concept of family itself is interesting because, the concept of found family, I think, is often very big in a lot of superhero type things. And often that's an idea of people who have been kind of rejected by their own families, or their families are dead, or something has happened, and they have to turn to each other to find family. And found family is kind of in opposition to or a replacement for blood family. And this is both, really. It is a primarily a family of, people who are like directly related to each other, a wife, a husband, a brother-in-law, the brother of the wife, and then a found family, and that, is the best friend of the husband in that connection. And so I like that it's a bit of a blend, but it is much more of just like this is just an actual family, with of course them having a child becoming a huge part of the story as well.
Yeah, I would say it's a formed family. Like for
Mm,
found family, I think of the Guardians, right? Where they are
right,
literally forced into the situation through outside circumstances. And initially they don't want to be, they don't like each other, et cetera, et cetera.
right,
Like the least family member here is Ben Grimm, the Thing. But he's been Reed's best friend all his life,
right,
depending on the story, like from a very young age. So as adults, they're just, this is my best friend.
right.
And to them, like that is an important bond, and it has been there since the beginning of this movie, since even past the 4 year flashback
Right.
of their mission, decades probably for them at this point.
Yeah, if anyone is kind of an outsider in the family, and again, it's never thought that they might leave, but they're kind of like the odd man out. It's Johnny Storm, the brother. He's more of an odd man out, I think, than the Thing is.
Yeah, personality wise,
Yeah.
sure. He's, well, has he left? Yeah, in the he is not a member of the Four in the cartoon, but again, that was for weird like legal reasons. Like they thought
Okay.
they were going to use him in a Spider-Man cartoon, so they
Uh huh.
omitted him from the Fantastic Four, and that's when Herbie, the robot, was
Mm.
introduced as the fourth member.
Okay.
The Thing has left the group from time to time, sometimes because he's cured, sometimes I think because he wants to focus on his own personal life and
Right.
family. And the She-Hulk has joined the Fantastic Four during those periods.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and certainly, I think in a comic book run that spans decades and decades, yeah, of course, it's not going to stay together. But I think that's very different than a movie where, Guardians, I think, is the one. I don't think the Guardians have really had a full breakdown of the team. I guess they sort of have, but they've been more together as a team, I think, than most MCU teams. But yeah, in terms of the on-screen stuff.
Mhm.
Well, so let's shift to some of the ethical questions that come up from this. And there's a few that I want to get into that I think are going to be tied into the one you wanted to talk about. But you've been talking about this idea of that you were kind of excited that it might be hinting at Reed Richards, our one of our sort of main characters. Um, that you've been kind of hinting at the idea that this shows that Reed Richards might, Mr. Fantastic himself, might well become a villain at some point. Talk a bit about that and kind of what your thoughts are on that, because I'm not quite sure I know what you meant by Reed Richards has some like potential for villainy in this one.
So, do you want me to talk about the movie first or his comic book history?
Let's talk about the movie first.
Okay. So, in this movie, to me, the critical scene was after their baby is born. He's
Right.
talking to Franklin, and he says something along the lines of, "I don't want you to be like me because there's something wrong with me." Do you remember
Mm.
that
Yep.
line? And I perked up when he said that. Like, what the heck? Like, what do you mean, right?
Yeah.
Because I think as a new parent, you can probably relate to, this is your child. Like, you want your child to grow up like you. Obviously, like be better than you in a lot of ways, but
Yeah.
part of parenting is imprinting and
Mm-hmm.
teaching.
Yep.
And so, like, why wouldn't you want your child to be like you? Like, what are you saying about yourself, right? So
Right.
that's what I was like. what is he saying about himself? Like, what is wrong with him?
Right.
And a lot of the other elements of this movie kind of hint at this, that what is fundamentally wrong with Reed is that he's too smart.
Mm.
He is usually cited as the smartest person on Earth or the Marvel universe or however you want to classify it. Like
Right.
he's number one with a bullet, and like people argue about the rest. Like Tony Stark number two, Riri Williams is number three, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Like down the line, where does Doctor Doom fit? He's usually number one,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one of those things that is often presented as a curse to
Yeah.
Reed. That he's too smart for his own good. He's too smart in like when Doctor Strange in Infinity War does the time stone things, and he's like, I've looked at 14 million futures, right?
Right.
Or the leader in the new Captain America movies, like, I've made all these probability calculations. Those are both things that like very much are Reed Richards. Like he thinks through all of the permutations of the scenarios. He's like, this is what has to happen.
Right.
And it's very mathematical and logical. And the reason that can go in a path of villainy is that it might not be ethical. It might not be, human in a sense, emotional. Like, I think
Right.
emotion can be a detriment, but it's important to humans and humanity because that fundamentally is who we are.
Right.
And if you just do things by calculation, it's like the trolley problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I cited this to you in our discussion about this, that he ran the trolley problem.
Yeah.
And one of the ethical dilemma in this movie is to stop Galactus from eating the Earth. Do you give up your child?
Right.
And at one point, he concluded yes, that was the correct thing to do mathematically.
Mm-hmm. So
And
okay.
go ahead.
So I have a number of levels on which I can respond to this, and it's kind of perfect because I do think that I do believe in trolley problems, not as a final way to decide things, but as a way to better understand questions and to avoid, because I agree with you that like pure logic is a problem, but I also think sentimentality is a problem. And I'm kind of really glad that this is the direction I thought you were going in, because this ties into the ethical question I really wanted to wrestle with, which is that trolley problem itself and the whole nature of it, because I think being overly just taking all emotion out of it is problematic, but I also think sentimentality and working on sentiment rather than cold hard facts can be really problematic. And but before I use that to set it up, because I will say, as a new parent, and again, I don't mean that my opinion trumps yours in any way, shape, or form. You brought that up, so I want to give that perspective. I incredibly identified with Reed Richards when he said that, and to me, it didn't feel villainous at all. It felt like the statement of someone who's wrestled with mental illness, because I think to me at least, part of what Reed is going through, and I'm probably projecting like crazy here, but he is someone who deals with a lot of anxiety, and one of the ways that, or anxiety is kind of a clinical term. I don't mean to use it in that way, but like there are some kind of brains where you look at a situation and you see the worst possible outcomes. You see what could go wrong here, and you start worrying about that, and that can get to a point where it's like not, it can be a point where it's like you have a really honed danger sense, and it's a good thing, or it could be a point where it's like pathological paranoia, and you're imagining threats all the time. And to me, I'm a person who has a number of mental illnesses, anxiety, depression being one, and some level of PTSD, borderline is another, though obviously they're very linked, and a genetic predisposition to alcoholism. And the borderline especially is also very genetic. Obviously it was triggered by a lot of trauma in my life, but I have a genetic predisposition to it, and there have been numerous other people in my family who have that. And when Mary and I were thinking of having a child for the first time a couple of years ago, I actually started looking a lot at in vitro fertilization with someone else's sperm, or some other way of removing my genetics from the proposition, because the last thing I would want is someone to have a brain like mine. And I want my child to be smart. I want my child to be, have a lot of the ethical thinking that I do. But there's a lot of demons that I've had to wrestle with and often lost and hurt people and hurt myself, but especially hurt others because of that, that I definitely hope my child doesn't have to do. And so for me, that's what I connected to when Reed said that, wasn't he thinks he's evil or bad, but just thinks he's wrestling with these demons. And I guess it does have a villainy aspect, in that he's acknowledging that it could go in this very dark direction. So I'll pause there, and then I'll get more into the trolley problem of it. But just to give you a different perspective on where he could be coming from there.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I think then the other part of it to me is, and it's funny because this is the ethical question I wanted to wrestle with. Let me start by asking you, what is wrong with trolley? It seems like you have this attitude. That sounds accusatory. I don't mean it that way. If I'm hearing you right, you think that thinking about things in terms of trolley problems is itself wrong or problematic. Is that accurate?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think my issue is that the trolley problem is it's simplistic. It
Right.
simplifies things just to numbers.
Right.
Right. And as humans, I think that we have to have emotion and things, or like we are guided by emotions, whether it's right or wrong, and that's what makes us human.
Right.
So it's like, the classic trolley problem of like, do you put it on the track where the trolley only harms one person or harms 5 people, but it doesn't posit whether you know any of these people, right?
Right.
And I think the natural inclination of anyone is, if you know the one person, if they are important to you, you will switch the trolley to the other 5 if you don't know them, if they're strangers.
Right.
And that you may say that is ethically wrong, but that's just what makes us human. And I kind of have to accept that in a actual live situation, that's how I would act.
Yeah.
And it's because, again, like, it's simplified and it's a known quantity. In a real, if there were some kind of real trolley situation, you don't know if you switch the tracks, like, what it's going to do. And like someone explaining to you, like, but if you switch the track in this moment, 5 strangers to you will die. Like, that's never, like, in the heat of a moment, that's never happening.
Right.
So I think the natural inclination of, I'm going to save the person that is close to me, is just how we act as humans. And that's kind of my issue with trolley problems, is like, it's a fun thought experiment. It's a fun discussion to have, but I don't think that an oversimplified version of it serves us in making real decisions.
Right. I can see that. And I think that can actually be a different perspective for us, because I think for me it's about getting to first principles and navigating from there. But I want to kind of focus on, because I think this is an area of real disagreement for us, which isn't bad, I think, but on this idea of the individual versus, the people you care about or the like. Because, and I'll just put this out there, I watched the movie from the perspective of Reed is the only one thinking properly of the group by being willing to even consider the idea of giving up Franklin. And when I've talked about this in other places, people have brought up the ideas of, but Galactus might have just kept going, stuff like that. And here I wanted to use the polytron logic of if we accept the premise as originally presented by Galactus, that if he gets Franklin, he will stop and he will retire and he will no longer want to eat planets. And we don't yet learn that Franklin himself will now become a new Galactus and go on to eat planets, which I'm not sure the movie actually tells us, but I think from comic books people have read into it, and that may be a very fair assumption. I think it is worthwhile to consider that as a possibility. And for me, here's the kind of response that I have to what you're saying, is that I think you're correct that there is a natural inclination within all of us to want to protect those that we are close to, those that we have an emotional bond with, as opposed to strangers, or even people we don't like. I don't think that's good though. And I say this as someone who, just give some context. And again, my opinion doesn't trump in any way. It's just another perspective. I watched the movie, as you said. As a new parent, um, going to watch this movie was one of the first things I'd done out of the house, away from my new child, Penn. And I get the inclination of defend, protect. On the first day when my baby was born, there was some thought of infection, so they had to do a number of blood draws. And one of the nurses who was doing it wasn't doing a very good job, and he was crying. And they kept trying to stick him and kept hurting him, and he was crying more. I have not been so close to throwing a punch as I was in that moment since I was maybe 12 years old on a school playground. I didn't, because I think it's good to restrain those things. But I very much get the human inclination of, this is a child, this is my child, I love, I protect, I have to protect. People are hurting him, this has to stop. But I felt like I recognized, yes, that is my feeling, and I don't think that's a good thing. For me at least, like, yes, loving your own people, loving your child, loving your family, loving your tribe or clan or your group, however you want to describe it, of course that's a natural human inclination. And I think removing that entirely is wrong. But I feel like a lot of the biggest problems we have in our society is when we go so far in that direction, is when it's, the number of people who I know who make horrible economic decisions that hurt other people because they want to provide for their family. Or taking it larger, like, I care about my neighborhood, and so I don't want those people being helped. Or I care about my nation, I want my nation to be great again, so fuck all those other people. To me, I really liked that it was raising this idea of, is there sometimes something valuable in saying our personal emotional connection to one person shouldn't necessarily trump the incredible bad thing that will happen to a much larger group of people.
Okay, so yeah, let's talk about this. I mean, if we go back to the idea of the trolley problem,
Mm-hmm.
what this situation is essentially one life versus, I don't know, what the 1960s, 4 billion, 3 billion,
Something like that, yeah.
potentially. And yeah, that's kind of that's kind of the most extreme example,
Right.
right? Like maybe you just give up the one. But I think with this movie, like the heart of this portion that it's getting at is that as humans, as a family, like your imperative is to protect your family.
Right.
And yes, there is a vision where you can say that humanity, like all of the humans of Earth, is one family.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, how do you reckon with that disparity? I guess that's the problem. It's a weird situation because it's Galactus, because Galactus is so overwhelming.
Right.
And yes, he can just eat a planet. He can destroy an entire planet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know what the correct answer is. I think for a movie, for heroes like this, and this is why, like, I talk about Reed as a potential villain, like this is his villain moment, is that heroes in movies always have to protect as many people as possible. Like, that is the directive. And that was like one of the things, to go back to the whole Superman, one of the things that made the Superman movie so delightful and uplifting was that the character of Superman just valued life,
Right.
in general, right? Like all life. Like he literally saved a squirrel in one scene,
Yeah.
which was ridiculous. But I
Right.
think it was ridiculous to make a point
Yeah.
about this character. And we just immediately got it. Like I laughed and then I was like, yep, okay, like that's who this guy is.
Right.
And in that same but opposite way, I think this moment is showing Reed like this is who Reed Richards is.
Right.
He's ultimately convinced by Sue
Mm-hmm.
to fight Galactus and not give up their son. But the fact that he thinks about it, the fact that I don't know if he said it out loud or
Mm-hmm.
Sue like read him because she knows him so well.
Right.
And she was like, you've thought about this, haven't you? You've considered it.
Right.
Right. And she's disgusted. Like that was such a powerful scene. She's disgusted because she knows him so well. And like she reads his face and it's like, yes, he did think about this. But that's who he is. And that leads him in other stories, and this is where I'll maybe expand the discussion,
Mm-hmm.
where he makes decisions that you and I would consider bad,
Right.
evil, even.
Mm-hmm.
But
Because he's
he
playing the
considers them to be correct. He considers them to be the logical, correct mathematical decision to navigate the situation with the least suffering or the least loss of life overall. But
Right.
he understands, like in this moment, like he's hurting people, he's violating human rights
Mm-hmm.
and such. Like
See,
that
and
was
this is
one of the big
okay.
things in the comic version of Civil War, is that
Mhm.
Reed Richards was on the side of Tony Stark and registration, and he was locking people up superheroes who didn't register. Well, I think it was villains at first, but then superheroes who didn't register. He was locking them up in the negative zone in a prison, violating
Right.
their civil rights. And I think Sue Storm found out about this and basically left him at that point and joined
Mm.
Captain America's side.
Yeah. See, and this is so interesting to me, and I think shows a really interesting difference between us because in that scene where Sue is so disgusted that he would even consider it, to me that's showing Sue's potential villainy. Because I think to me there's such an incredible selfishness of not even and such a danger of saying I value my family so much that to hell with everyone else and I won't even consider this possibility. That to me is the root of so much of what I see as evil. And um, to me, I feel like the story is at its best when there's tension there. That and again, I don't know if this is me projecting what I want to see, but I feel like this idea of Reed being the one who's a little too logical and too willing to just play the numbers game, and Sue being the one who's too emotional and only willing to look at like protecting things, and that gets into some really bad gender stereotypes, which of course I'd want to avoid. But like,
Well, why avoid it?
say again.
I was saying, why avoid it?
Why avoid which part?
The gender stereotypes. I
Oh,
mean,
I mean,
I think this is very much set up to play off of that, because
I
Sue Storm is literally the mother of Franklin, but also
right,
is considered the mother to this group.
right.
And I
I mean,
think that is that is an important character dynamic for
I think
her and
that's
for
very
this
true.
group.
I guess I think the idea of having two parents, one of whom is more logical, one of whom is more emotional, and both to a potentially problematic degree, is a great story. I think there's been a societal idea of men are always more logical and intelligent and women are always more emotional that is very problematic and very based in misogyny. And I just wouldn't want to see the story. I would want a little bit of care that the story isn't seen as reupholding that narrative is all I mean.
Okay. I mean,
But
I I I guess I disagree. I don't know. Like I see that dynamic play out.
mm-hmm,
And again, like this is where we disagree on this. Like I see Reed's intelligence as a negative in
right.
this moment. So I
Yeah,
think it's okay for it to play out that way, and we have differing views on it.
oh, well, I'm sorry. I think we're having two different conversations at the same time. I'm only saying that the only part of it I want to avoid is the idea that Reed thinks that way because he's a man and Sue thinks that way because she's a woman. That's all I mean. Reed being, I think Reed being to a degree of intelligence and Sue being to a degree of emotion, and yeah, you and I can disagree on which one of those is more problematic. Although I think I'm saying both can be problematic. all of that I don't want to avoid. I want to wrestle with that more, and I think the movie does, and I'll get to that in a second. The only thing I was saying to avoid was just the gender stereotype idea of it. That's all I meant.
Okay. I guess I'm just a little confused because I think it is strongly playing off the gender stereotype.
Mm,
But you're like earlier you said like the Reed is the man and he's logical and intelligent, and that's always that's better. Like that's what society considers better versus emotionality. And I think what this movie to me was saying is like that's terrible.
right.
What he's doing, what he's considering is terrible, and we should side with Sue.
I think it is, but I think the so I think for me the pivotal scene is where Sue then goes before the public and says, "Look, I'm not going to consider giving up my baby no matter what you guys put on me, but also I'm not going to sacrifice you either." And to
Hmm.
me, that's her making a step towards where Reed is. With him also, because I think, like to me, I think the movie is more on Sue's side, and I'm disagreeing with that. But no, I'm definitely not saying I think Reed is better in that regard. I think in that one scene, I don't think there's something villainous about Reed. I guess I think there's nothing villainous about considering an option. Um, like to me, Reed is willing to look at an option that Sue is not willing to even consider, and I feel like by the time she talks to the public, she is more willing to consider that, and I think that's a change. And I think Reed is also more willing to understand why him even phrasing this as a potential option in purely logical terms hurts Sue. It feels to me like both of them take a step towards each other rather than one being right or the other being wrong.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Hmm.
I think that's an important part of their dynamic
Right.
in general and in this movie is that they are very different people and they come at situations like this from different directions, and it is their ability to discuss it and potentially compromise or at least like listen to the other perspective and then reach a solution together,
Right. Yeah.
whether they both agree with it or not. And again, like the times I think that Reed gets himself into trouble with situations like this in the comics is when he just does things on his own and
Mm.
doesn't talk to Sue, and then Sue finds out what he's been doing. He's
Yeah.
like, what are you doing? Like, why didn't you talk to me?
Right.
And sometimes his reasoning is like, I was too buried in my experiments. Sometimes it's like, I knew you wouldn't consider it, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it's like the times when he ignores her or like doesn't bring her into the discussion that he
Right.
really gets himself in trouble.
Yeah. Well, and let's now go back to there are two things you said that I wanted to harp on. The first, I'll just mention this. You talked about Superman rescuing the squirrel,
Yeah.
and how essential that is. There's a scene in Superman and Lois, the last of the CW shows about Superman that I keep raving about. And forgive me, this will be a small spoiler. Um, but there's a moment early in one of the seasons where he has this kind of official working relationship with the American government, and because the Americans have this, it's kind of the Walker plot line, although she's not involved, but the sort of like, you know, using Superman to fight extraterrestrial threats, but
Sorry, what do you mean by Walker plotline?
Sorry, not Walker, Waller, Amanda Waller.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, and at one point, he hears people in a submarine screaming in terror because the submarine has had a breach and the submarine's going to sink and everyone's going to die. And without a second thought, he flies off and he rescues the submarine.
Hmm.
And he then gets back and is with the people at the the American military again, talking about how they're going to work together. And they say, "We're kind of pissed at you because that was a North Korean submarine."
Hmm.
And he
Sure.
is so clearly baffled at this idea that like the flag on the sub should have changed whether or not he saved people. And yeah, I love that because you're right. To me, it's another sign of like rescuing the squirrel of like he doesn't want people to die, and he's not going to care about who those people are or what flag they're under or what it is. It's if they're and we talked about this quite a lot in our Superman episode, which people can hear just an episode or two back. His perspective is, sure, there's all this complicated politics, but if people are going to die, I'm going to stop them from dying.
Hmm.
The other thing that you talked about, and I think this is an essential part of the Final Four trolley problem, really, and part of where I wish I'd understood it better, is the degree to which, as official heroes, and it does seem in Final Four they're kind of like officially recognized and given some legal sanction to do what they do you have a higher responsibility towards the greater good and versus your own personal interests? And let me pose to you what is, I will admit, a trolley problem, but it's at least, I think, closer to the realm of possibility. And I know there have been situations like this that have happened, and I'm not sure exactly what the training is, but a firefighter, an EMT is in a situation where in one room is a person they have, their wife, their child, their parent, someone like that, and another room is a group of 5 strangers. And they really have time to kind of like rescue the one or rescue the group. I think if it's a normal person, I think you're right. You're going to go rescue the person and try to be a good person to the others. But if you don't, it's understandable. Do you think that a person who is basically hired by the government to save people is supposed to forego their personal allegiance to the person they love and know to save the greater number?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to like give an answer, I think like that's probably part of training, but it is also part of, I would assume it's part of like not putting yourself in situations.
It's why most firefighters don't work in the neighborhood that their family lives to avoid exactly that situation. And it's why you often say like police officers should recuse themselves from cases that involve
exactly,
which never happens, unfortunately. But and so I guess to me that's the other reason why I want them to at least. I have sympathy at least for the people of the world when they get angry at them, because it feels to me like in this, unlike maybe say Captain America, once he's gone rogue, they have officially given the Fantastic Four that permission and assignment of, you are hired by us to be these people, and therefore there's a higher responsibility to put aside their personal connection to Franklin to save the greater good. Is that an accurate reading, you think, of? Well, actually, let me say, change that? Does that, to your mind, change the moral calculus at work here?
I don't know if it changes the moral calculus. I agree with the idea that they should not be the decision makers in this situation, because they are compromised by their relationship with their son. And you like, this is one of those Star Wars The Force Awakens issues, by which I mean this movie presents a new world, a new situation, and just like sprinkles some things, but doesn't explain enough.
Yeah.
Right. So when we get in The Force Awakens, we don't really understand the relationship between the First Order and the Resistance and like the official New Republic government, and the movies themselves never fully flesh that out, which is a huge issue. And here in this movie, Fantastic Four, it's the same thing. Like, they tell us that Sue Storm has established the Future Foundation, which is very different from what it is in the comics. And it appears to be some kind of United Nations. And they mention that they got everyone to agree to disarmament, except for Latveria, I guess. But
which is Dr. Doom's nation, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But if you think too much about it, like, it doesn't make sense, or not enough is explained, because this is the 1960s. We know what was going on in the 60s in the real world, and it's like, how much could the existence of the Fantastic Four change, the Cold War?
Right.
Because the USSR exists on one of those maps where they're tracking all of the gates for the teleportation device. The USSR exists. East and West Berlin are listed as separate cities. So like Germany is divided. So the Cold War, or like the situation, the politics of that, does exist in this world, and yet the Future Foundation has gotten everyone to agree to disarm.
Right.
And it's not explained enough, and that leads to this problem of how and why does everyone in the world agree to this plan and just like have put their faith in the Fantastic Four? I think like big picture, that's the biggest problem I have with this movie.
Yeah. Yeah, that did feel really out of nowhere that there's so much public buy-in to them. Um, and yeah, that raises interesting questions as well about is the kind of North Korea issue that I talked about with Superman. Like, I can imagine a situation where the Final Four. Why do I keep calling them that? I can imagine a situation where the Fantastic Four, like go to Chernobyl to stop the meltdown, and like does the American government get mad about that or something?
Yeah. And I really thought going into the final act when they start activating the portals that
Mm-hmm.
the issue was going to be that one singular nation, whether it's like the US, the Soviet Union, or in this case probably Latveria, like one nation is just like, you know what, we're not gonna activate our portal, we're gonna peace out because we've decided like we don't buy into
Yep.
this plan. And that didn't happen. They went with something else. But that's what I felt was missing, I guess,
Mm.
is just Sue makes one speech, as you said. It was a good speech. It was
Yeah.
well delivered, well written, but she makes a speech to a mob outside the Baxter building. And there's like maybe 100 people there. And I guess it was also recorded and televised, but
Mm-hmm.
that convinces everyone, right? Like I was like, I wanted more.
Yeah. I
And
can
I
see that.
think there was probably something. So here I'm going to talk about um, what was missing, literally missing in the movie, which is the Red Ghost, which is John Malkovich's character,
Mm.
which was filmed. He was in the very first trailer, so that's why we're like, what happened to the Red Ghost? He
Right.
was a Soviet scientist who had super apes and also like went up in a rocket ship and got bombarded with cosmic rays and became a super villain. And he's supposed to be in this movie, and that's why I thought like, oh, like they probably have something with the Soviet Union where they have a disagreement and they
Mm.
have to like convince him, right, in the same way
Right.
that they talked to the Mole Man, which was great. And I think that's kind of a component where I like wish there had been more, is like
Yeah.
talking to someone who in our world is like politically opposed
Right.
and
Yeah.
convincing them of this plan.
I could see that as being really interesting, and especially kind of framing that against like who where is this public buy-in, because it felt like in terms of the Fantastic Four and who their buy-in is and who obviously this movie is made in the 1960s, but it felt like it was very inspired by, or at least very like kind of coded by, influencer culture of today, because it felt like there wasn't quite the like, we as a United Nations have officially voted to make you our representatives, but kind of like we give you all this like adulation and attention, and because we are looking to you as that. Um,
Hmm.
and I talked about this also on the Next Reel podcast, which is more of just a film review podcast. But one of the other people in there, Kyle, I think it was Kyle, who's a huge MCU buff, he made the point that a lot of the time that the Fantastic Four, they don't want to be heroes, they want to be scientists, they want to be explorers. And that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of time it's not that they're not the EMTs of the world. It's just that because they have these powers, everyone expects them to go rescue people and go fight the big bad. And so they're kind of like, okay, fine, we'll do it, but then please can you leave us alone and let us go explore, whatever pocket dimension or thing we want to do next.
Yeah, I mean Johnny very much. That's his character. Part of his
Right.
character arc is that he wants to be back in space.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to be an astronaut again.
For sure. Well, this has been a great discussion. I'm really glad you kind of brought it up and highlighted some things that I think we agree on and some things we see differently. And I like a movie that raises those questions like that. Any kind of final questions or points you wanted to make or address or get into before we wrap up?
I mean, the question of the episode, could Reed Richards become a villain?
Oh yeah, let me rephrase that. My apologies. All right, so we've gone off on a lot of kind of tangents and stuff, but let's get back to the main question that you'd kind of brought up. Could Reed become a villain? Um, so my understanding of it is that in the comics, it's this kind of like the hyper intelligence and the hyper awareness of every threat is it kind of like an Iron Man Ultron thing where it's sort of like he wants to do more and more to prevent threats, but by doing so he's restricting people more and more?
Yeah, but worse.
Okay.
So let's see how quickly I can get through this. And this is important for like MCU lore as well, because the next Avengers movie, which is only 2 movies away, is Doomsday, which will lead into Secret Wars,
Right.
and the Reed Richards like plays a huge part in Secret Wars in the comics, and we'll have to see like how much they adapt this. But you're familiar with the Ultimate Universe, right?
No.
Okay. Um, so there's a multiverse,
Right.
and in that multiverse, the primary Earth that most of Marvel stuff takes place in is called Earth 616. That's just a
Okay.
number that was given. And then this movie, Fantastic Four, calls the Fantastic Four Earth 828.
Right.
So that they're using that nomenclature.
Hmm.
The Ultimate Universe, I believe, is 1610, and it was first published, I think, in the early 2000s as like
Okay.
a full reset. Like, here are familiar characters, here are the Avengers, but they're different. They were edgier. It was very 2000s.
Mm.
In the very first issue, I remember the Incredible Hulk is rampaging through the city because his ex girlfriend Betty Ross is on a date with Freddie Prinze Jr. Like that's the flavor that the Ultimate Universe opened with.
Okay.
And every character is just like a little bit edgier, a little darker, like so 2000s. And Reed Richards in this universe is the very same. Like his backstory is very similar to the 2015 Fantastic movie,
Uh huh.
in that he is abused, unfortunately, as a child by his father, and this leads him like down a darker path overall. And what ends up happening with him is that he becomes a villain, and because of his abuse, because of decisions he makes. Like I'm not trying to say like that's the only reason, but it definitely like sets him on this darker path, and then he continues to make bad decisions, which ultimately leads to Sue Storm rejecting his marriage proposal,
Mm.
and in a very like incel fashion. Like, he keeps coming back to this and blaming her for
Right.
what he's become. But also, like, when the multiverse opens up and he visits other Earths and sees the Reed Richards in those Earths married to Sue Storm with 2 kids, like a happy family man, like
Hmm.
that also triggers him, right? Like, that's what he could have had.
Right. And of course, it must be her fault that you didn't have it.
Yeah, when very much it's not. Like, he continue like he chooses villainy at each of the inflection points, and he ends up becoming. He changes his name to the Maker.
Oh boy.
He sets up what's it called? It's not the Future Foundation. It's the Children of Tomorrow. He sets up the city and creates like a time bubble in this structure, and basically like lives for 10,000 years, I think,
Right.
within the bubble, because that's how his body was affected by the cosmic rays. His head expands, kind of like Leader-esque, because he uses his stretchy powers to like expand his head and his brain, and so he like makes his brain bigger with his powers. He becomes the Maker, and in like those 10,000 years, he goes like full eugenics and
Mm.
creates the Children of Tomorrow, who are like super smart, but also just continues like to imprint uh, and be devoid of humanity, I would say.
Right.
And he becomes this villain, and in the Secret Wars, like he continues to do villainous things, like very important. Like, Doctor Doom is going to be important. Like, that's what they're setting up.
Hmm.
Obviously, the next movie is called Doomsday, but I think like post, like leading into Secret Wars and then post Secret Wars, that this, if they defeat Doom there, that the Maker could be like the setup for a villain for the next major Avengers arc.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like Pedro Pascal. People talk about how like, oh, he's in everything, but he's in everything because he's good, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
not forget that. And I think it would be absolutely fascinating to see him play this character as a hero for the next 3 or 4 movies, and then but see the cracks, see like that Anakin turn. And
Mm-hmm.
again, that's why I love that scene where he tells Franklin, "There's something wrong with me." Like if that's
Right.
the first hint of future makerdom, then I'm like, oh, that could be really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I have complicated feelings on this. We're gonna do it. Like I said, to me, there's something wrong with me. Felt more my brain like it felt more like acknowledging problems than acknowledging like something like bad or evil or villainous. But it certainly could go in that direction. I could see that. And I think at some point we are going to do an episode about mental illness as a cause for villainy and that. But I'm not saying that that plot line is going to go that direction. I think I would be all for something like that because I definitely think I am constantly looking at threats and therefore thinking that I need to fix this. My only thought is I do think that that's been done to some extent with Tony Stark. And so I'd want to make sure it feels fundamentally different than uh, the Ultron kind of storyline. And it does, from what you're describing, it does sound like it's fairly different.
Here, if I may, like, here's the
Yeah,
difference. Tony Stark was reflexive, as
right.
heroes often are. And he did like frame it as a what was it, a armor or shield
Yeah, I
to
want to put a
armor
suit
to
of armor around the world.
yeah. So it's still creating that suit of armor is proactive, but armor itself is defensive,
Right.
right? The issue that arises with Reed Richards as the maker is that he starts, what is it? He like time travels and changes history. So he very much goes down that that pre-crime type deal
Mm-hmm.
to the point where he's like proactively altering characters' biographies and history to suit his needs and what he
Mm,
believes to be the needs of the world,
right.
which increasingly grows more and more selfish.
Yeah.
Right? I think like a lot of characters we see like this begin very altruistically, like Injustice Superman, of like, I'm gonna do this to like stop war, to stop
Yeah.
crime, to save lives. But then as it continues, it is revealed or becomes more so that it's just selfish motivation, like lashing out or just making things better for themselves. Like in one of the stories, Reed, or the maker, like Reed Richards as the maker, tortures another Reed Richards and convinces him that he's Doctor Doom.
Oof.
He
Yes.
takes like a fundamentally good person, like in this universe, like he's a good Reed Richards, and
Mm-hmm.
he tortures him, keeps calling him Doom, like disfigures him, puts him in the mask, and like, your name is Doom, you are Doom, you're bad,
Right.
until like it just like, sinks in, is
Believes it.
like
Yeah.
he becomes Doom.
Yeah. I think that could be really interesting to watch. I think I don't see that. Like when you said, "Oh, this movie kind of might be setting up Reed as a villain," I was deeply confused. I think it comes down to that I don't see anything villainous in either what he says to Franklin or the fact that he considers the option. Um, and so I hope that they don't base it off of that. I do think, though, and this is a whole other question that we haven't really gotten into because the movie doesn't even touch it, but I think another additional question that I hope the movie's going to explore later is, they kind of just send Galactus off somewhere else. And
Yes.
that does mean that eventually, and it's like to the far end of the universe, so it's going to be an awful long time before he gets back to Earth. But he's presumably going to find some other planets. They put him in the path. There's some other group of people who are now in danger because they're far enough away from Earth. They're where now Galactus is now, and maybe it's going to take Galactus a while to get there, but he's going to get there. And at first I did think that it was going to be something where like they send him to the 616, and that's why they have to. That's why they kind of wind up meeting up with our heroes from the rest of the MCU, is because they're like, oh no, we sent you Galactus. Oops. Let's go deal with that.
Yeah, that I thought that's what something like that was going to
right?
happen.
Or that if they used all of those, if their original plan had worked, they were going to send their Earth to the 616, whatever it was
Hmm.
going to be.
Yeah, yeah.
But I could see something where he is in some way, there are consequences, and other people do suffer and die, and maybe another planet is eaten because of the decisions they made to protect not only Franklin but their own planet. And it's that where he's like, oh my gosh, we should have dealt with these consequences. You know, look what happened when I listened to Sue's emotions and the emotions of the world. And that's what takes him into this kind of, maybe I should be the one making the decisions and I shouldn't trust anyone else. Because I do think that that's the, like I said, I am afraid of both over intellectualism and sentimentality. And I think there's, and as much as I sort of in that moment am more on Reed's side, I do definitely see the possibility of him becoming that, like, pure logic, utilitarianism says that we should do it this way, and no one else agrees with me, but I know that I'm right, so I'm just going to take over. And, you know, to me, that's, we've said on this podcast a lot that, like, the best villains are off, or at least I feel like this, the best villains are the ones who believe they're the good guys. And I think that's true of most of the most villainous people in history. Not all by any means, but certainly an awful lot, you know. Hitler generally believed he was doing good things for Germany and for the world, and he was completely wrong, obviously. Um, so yeah, so I think that could be a very interesting direction for Reed to go. I don't necessarily see anything in this movie setting it up, but I just don't have the background you do. So I'm very interested to see if we do go in that direction. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it.
Yeah, I don't think this was a setup
Yep.
by any means. To me, it wasn't even a hint of this,
Yeah.
but it was something that being familiar with his comic book history and that the movie people are aware. Like I said, the 2015 Fant Four Stick very much leaned into his origin in the Ultimate Universe.
Right.
And I don't know that they were setting him up in that way, because I think that movie came out the same year that Secret Wars came out in comics.
Mm-hmm.
So the full history of the Maker wasn't even really written out yet.
Yeah.
But they were kind of going, obviously that movie was going in a darker direction with
Right.
these people. And I'm glad that this new one, First Steps, goes in a brighter, optimistic direction.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like it's like the Star Wars prequels. Like if we like watching that, we know that Anakin Skywalker is going to become Darth Vader. So maybe
Right.
it's a little too on the nose when they do those things, and they have the leitmotif of the Imperial March, and Palpatine is like, we will be watching your career with great interest. It's like, oh, okay, like because he's going to be Darth Vader, we get it.
Right.
But if they set it up in the same way, but without us actually knowing if he's going to end up the Maker, and just like kind of creep it forward, like inch
Yeah.
by inch, I think we could get there.
Yeah. I mean, and so in my Star Wars Generations podcast, one of the things we often talk about is how differently people of our generation who grew up watching Vader view the prequels compared to people who grew up with the prequels and may have known on some level that he's going to become Vader, but also like at 6 years old, 8 years old, how much are you thinking about those things? And in that regard, I think I'll be really interested to see more of this story as someone who hasn't read those comic books. Like, I don't have any knowledge of him becoming the Maker beyond this conversation you and I have just had. So that'll be like, I've never seen the Maker on screen the way I'd seen Vader on screen before watching Anakin. So, yeah, a lot to discuss. This has been great, Ricky. Thank you so much for bringing this topic up. Listeners, as always, let us know what you think. We'll want to hear from you. Please check out all the other podcasts that I do on the True Story FM family of podcasts. Both Riki and Sarah Hayashi, Riki's partner, were on the Star Wars podcast for quite a while. Hopefully get them back both as guests at some point soon. I'm also on Marvel Movie Minute at the moment, discussing the second Thor movie, and desperately trying to find things to like in that movie. And every now and then I do find one or two. But mostly I try to be funny about the things I don't like.
Oh. Hello?
I hit the leave studio button by accident there. So let me just dig again. But yeah, please check all those out. Please send us your email. Please sign up for hear more about us on Facebook, Twitter, Blue Sky, all those places. And most importantly, may the force be with you.